Dirty Moderates. When he was elected Lieutenant Governor of Maryland in 2003, Michael Steele made history as the first African-American elected to statewide office. And again, did the same thing with the chairmanship of the Republican National Committee in 2009. Michael is a longtime political analyst and contributor to MSNBC, currently a co-host of a must-see show, by the way, MSNBC's The Weekend, which airs Saturdays and Sundays East Coast time at 8 a.m. Having recently appeared on Michael's own podcast, the Michael Steele Podcast, the discussion between both of us is like a conversation that probably would never end if we wouldn't stop talking. But now he's in a guest chair, and I'm excited to ask Michael about everything: his life, his time in the Republican Party, his life as a Republican, his life as a Black Republican, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All things Trump, all things never Trump, as you know. All of this and more today with my special guest, Michael Steele. Michael.
What's up, you dirty moderate, you?
This is great for all that we have. Now we have some good overlap. So guys, it's like May 6th again. The conversation is just continuing. Right. I'm loving it. There we are. Michael, it's so good to see you so soon. We have to jump in with the big news, right? I know. Yeah. I know you're shocked. I know you just can't believe Nikki Haley capitulated. You must just be, wow, how could this have happened? Oh, Nikki, you know her well. You were chairman of the party, I'm sure, when she was elected governor in 2010.
Yeah, we got her elected in 2010 along with Tim Scott and a whole bunch of other folks who've since disappointed. Look, in many respects, Adam, it was not surprising. It wasn't disappointing. It was expected. You just wanted to figure out, okay, how does it come at us? How does she reframe the narrative after all the things she said about Trump even before she got into the presidential campaign? And there is a calculation by the Nikki Haleys in the party who are on the outside, and even some of those still inside, that will just get past Trump in 2028. I will look much better to Republicans having compromised myself now. A, they will have forgotten, and B, they will be so glad Trump is away that they'll come running into our arms. And what I'm trying to tell these poor fools is stop being so stupid and naive. That's not how this is going to work. That's like saying, oh, all of a sudden, all the people who wanted to kill Mike Pence on January 6th are suddenly not, okay, Mike, all is forgiven. We put the noose back in the closet and we've taken down the scaffold. Come on back and be our presidential nominee. That's not how this iteration of Republicans, and they're not Republicans. And I mean, they've made Republican and Republicanism a dirty word. This is MAGA. This is Trump. It is that simple. It is an infection, an infestation that needs to be cleaned out. Either that or you just burn the party down. I mean, because that's what do you do with any infestation? If there's no easy remedy, then you got to do what you got to do. And that means get rid of it. And so the reality for Nikki and others is this is the party you think you're going to step into. Well, they're not going to welcome you. They remember what you said about Trump. And the only reason there's no one screaming at you now, and Donald Trump isn't screaming at you now, is because you bent the knee and kissed the ass. So there you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to my exec producer, Dawn, who you just met, about how her heart is broken by Nikki Haley, not because she had, and I'm talking for her, not because she believes every politician is so truthful, but because she could have been somebody like a Liz Cheney who just did the right thing, and you know what, maybe like you and I spoke on your show, maybe there is some third party down the road, a Lincoln party, we don't know, but being in thrall to a manifestly unfit con man 8 years into this charade is insane. I mean, we're still doing it. I know you're exasperated, but it can't be repeated enough, right?
Well, no, and it needs to be repeated, and it needs to be made very clear what is happening. this is not normal. It is not normal. It is not normal to embrace thugs and white nationalism and KKK and Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin. It is not normal to articulate you want to be a dictator of the United States. It is not normal to claim your presidency is going to be about retribution because, oh, my poor little feelings were hurt and everyone told me I lost and I don't think I lost, so I want to prove I didn't lose. Crybaby. It is not normal to want to put kids in cages or to create concentration camps in the various southern states or border states so that you can indiscriminately deport people without due process, without recognition of the rule of law. Speaking of which, it is not normal to tell people that, yes, when I become president, I'm going to prosecute the former president for crimes that he's committed. What crimes exactly? So none of this is normal. And the more we remind people it isn't, hopefully the more they come to their senses and recognize that it isn't. A. B, that the 4 years of Donald Trump were not good. 1 million plus people died because of his ignorance and his bad policy and his poor leadership. He told the country to inject themselves with bleach at the height of COVID after telling us at the beginning, this will be over in 3 months. So I think we just need to recognize the truth and stop wallowing in our own selfishness and pity parties about how bad things are, because they were worse. They were worse. And I guess for me, it's just frustrating when I hear people out there, particularly Republicans like Nikki Haley, justifying their bending the knee to Donald Trump by saying that Joe Biden has been a catastrophe. In what respect? Oh, you mean getting the infrastructure bill that Donald Trump couldn't get passed? Oh, you mean bringing down inflation from 9% to 3%? What was the catastrophe? There's no Green New Deal that the far left wanted, that wasn't implemented. What was the catastrophe? Afghanistan? Oh, guess what? The Biden administration executed the plan that the Trump administration drew up. What catastrophe are you talking about? So
Right.
more people lie, the more we have to beat them back with the truth. And that's a lot of what this campaign, I think, is going to be about, Adam.
Yeah, Michael, I think you actually read my mind, no surprise, about the catastrophe comment, because one of the things that has been really insidious by MAGA, not by conservatives, not by the right, but by this monsters do on Maple Street world we're living here in the Twilight Zone, is that our ideological differences are called catastrophes, but by the right, but our election denialism, our unwillingness to concede elections, our full-on assault physically on the Capitol and on the seat of government, metaphorically, are normalized, right? So it's a catastrophe because you don't like said bill. You and I talked last time. I have a lot of disagreements with the Biden administration. That is not catastrophic compared to Donald Trump and his plan for America. That's just, but using that word also goes into something that I talk about a lot, and I'm sure you do too. It's an own the libs BS, meaning in order to push through your autocratic bullshit, right? I'm just going to say everything the other guy says is bad. If you're wearing a blue shirt, and I don't wear a blue or a red shirt, as you know, you're bad. So, hey, if Jesus comes for a meeting with you and me and we're never Trump, well, that's bad. Jesus is bad. It doesn't matter. So it's this own the libs, this horrible normalization. And I thought that what Nikki did in saying that is she just can't bear the catastrophe. Well, Nikki, you know what? You are paving the way for a true catastrophe.
Well, and that's the part of it, because when all these people, J.D. Vance, Nikki Haley, Governor Sununu, all of them who have folded like the cheapest of cheap suits because Donald Trump winked at them, looked at them, or threatened them. what are they going to do when Project 2025 of the Heritage Foundation is implemented? When they wholesale strip out, fire government employees, which they can't do, but they will, who's going to stop them? I mean, what, you don't think they're going to come after you? You don't think at some point they're going to hold up your words again and say, you said this about Donald Trump? And so therefore now this is the pretense under which we will throw you in jail? You don't think that's going to happen to you? In what world does a totalitarian dictator a-hole operationalize in a way in which he gives you a pass because you endorsed him? Really? You think that's how that works? So,
and on a I guess maybe a less dire note, these are people like Sununu and Haley, you know, who have built careers, as you know well, and we're going to talk about, on the idea of this 10th Amendment and state power and keeping the federal government out of things. Man, you guys are literally, like I said, you know, you're laying down the cement for the greatest expansion of federal power under any president ever, right? All the things, your laboratories of democracy aren't shit. Okay, they're going to be Trump's laboratories, and you're going to be the lab mice, you know, and that, again, that's the collapse of the conservative movement as we've known it, which makes me want to shift for a second, because you hosted me and I loved it, and I said to you, the thing I'm most fascinated in not only is your personal story, but you know, you really were like at a real tipping point as Republican chairman, not only because you were there opposite Obama, you know, or sort of as a counterpoint to Obama, but you are and always have been a Black Republican. But let's go back to the beginning. I know you're born in Maryland, right? Is that
Andrews Air Force Base? Yep.
Okay, Andrews Air Force Base. And then I know you love musical theater because we talked about that, like I do. But what about your like formative years? Were you political then, or not so much?
No, well, you know, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my dad is still there in our family home. And so I still have a very strong tie to my home roots. I love Washington. It is the best city in the world as far as I'm concerned. And everyone says that about their home city, I'm sure. But it's a great city.
Place. I agree. I love it.
It's a special place because it's also the capital of the nation. And so, you know, growing up, I had a chance to see everybody come to Washington, all walks of life. Even as a young kid during the 1960s, watching the city struggle with, you know, the war protests, the sexual revolution, women out on Pennsylvania Avenue burning their bras, which was actually pretty exciting for a 10-year-old. So you know, these things were part of my story growing up. So I think a somewhat unique, as most native Washingtonians do, a unique perspective of the country, and a unique appreciation of its value to the proposition that all men and women are created equal, and the role that it has played to secure the rights attendant to that. And so that was always kind of in the back. So this idea of, for me, for public service, as a young kid, growing up in the Catholic Church, I wanted to be a priest. I wanted to execute that sense of service through the priesthood. God had another plan. I wound up, after graduating from Hopkins, and going into the seminary and spending a few years as an Augustinian seminarian, making the conscious decision to move that sense of service into the public space. And for me, it was a little bit of coming full circle, because then it was a matter of really kind of playing out a lot of the storylines that I grew up with, whether it was around civil rights, whether it was around, you know, views of our role in the world and what the U.S., what our responsibilities are, et cetera. But most importantly, Adam, it was, how do you help people improve the quality of their lives? How do you make things just a little bit better? How do you get to a point where tomorrow is, you know, a little bit better than today. And for your children, it'll be even more so. So those were the things that kind of moved me as a young man and into adulthood, that, you know, I wound up being pretty much in the right place at the right time for public service. I call myself an accidental politician, because the offices I've held, I never sought. I never sought to be a state party chairman or a county chairman, certainly not even national chairman. I didn't seek out being lieutenant governor. It was not on my bingo card that I had, you know, had to put the X in that box.
Bob Ehrlich chose you, right?
Yeah. And in most cases, in all cases, I've been asked to step into a role that I would then, I put my heart into, and I brought my values into. So how I look at my life to this point was that time in the monastery, living promises of poverty, chastity, and obedience, understanding the nature of humanity and mankind, understanding the teachings, the tenets of my faith, but even more importantly, the teachings of Christ with respect to love thy neighbor as thyself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? I brought that into my public service, and tried to make that a part of what I do, which makes what we're going through now that much more frustrating for me, because what I sense is a greater selfishness among the American people. It's inward thinking. They don't care what happens to their neighbor, because their neighbor is an enemy because they don't agree with their neighbor politically. And when I think a country gets to the point where its values, its culture, its economy, its sense of purpose are driven by politics, then you wind up with what we see playing out. Anyone, there is literally, to quote a P.T. Barnum, a sucker born every minute. And because they're going to go for the sucker play, and Donald Trump is the ultimate sucker. He is the P.T. Barnum of American politics, and he knows how to get you to think that what he's telling you is right, when your instincts and your common sense that your mama and your daddy taught you tells you, you know, that's not right. But you don't want to be on the wrong side of Donald Trump. You'd rather be on the wrong side of history. And that, to me, should disturb a lot of Americans.
Yeah. Well, I have two things to say to that. One is that, because I think about it every day, almost all day as you do, you know, all these issues, which I guess keep me up at night. You know, Donald Trump has revealed in this country, and I think I cottoned to this pretty early. A lot of people are still going, wow, I can't believe people want to live under this, or they're interested in a dictator. Trump appeals to the most anti-American revolution tendency in this country, which is the love of a king. I don't mean watching King Charles's coronation. I'm not talking about all that.
Right.
Reading the tabloids and loving Meghan and Harry or not loving them, whatever. I'm talking about this idea that this experiment needs to be controlled, and though we fought for independence, a king could do it, or an authoritarian, or some kind of Kaiser or tyrant or despot, because people, you hear it. They say, no, we need a dictator. And I'm not just talking about MAGA rallies. People will be like, things are out of control. I am angry about the economy. Okay, which I've said to you on your show, I don't think the Democrats should run around telling the ordinary American that their eggs don't cost too much. That's not a winning strategy. Right. I mean, but Trump's, like you said, his wink and his nod against better judgment, or just against the trance that people are in, has this way of, what's that?
No, I was going to say, can I put a pin in what you just said? Because
sure.
I think it's there's an important historical note around your analysis of people wanting a king. Mm-hmm. It is one of the things that our founders fought very much against.
Yes.
People forget that about 50% of the colonists actually wanted a king. They wanted, at various stages in the debate whether it was during the Continental Congress or if it was during the emergence of the Congress that as we know it today, there was a big, intense debate around this idea of what a president's role would be.
Yes.
And folks really thought we needed a king here. And that sentiment did not lose favor over 248 years. It's still very much in the body of the American people. And at critical times, you find, and we saw this in the 1930s, this sort of mad dash to embrace Hitler here in the U.S. People forget Nazi rallies at times at Madison Square Garden, right? So this is not something that is outside of our American box. But what has always been important for us as citizens is that we recognized a higher principle, a higher ideal, because we knew the establishment of a king would not benefit all. You would no longer be a government of, by, and for people. You would be a government of, by, and for a king. And that's what Trump wants. He wants this to be about him. So I think that's a very important historical footnote to make to your point that this is not outside of what we've been fighting against for 200 plus years.
I mean, America's right when it's always said it's overused, but it's true. It's an idea, but that idea contains ideals that have been in contest and tension with one another from that very beginning, always. So you're always just slightly, look, I always tell people, I had Joe Ellis on recently. We did a history, we wanted to have a lot of historians on, and I love this stuff like you do, especially the founding history. You know, the Constitution was nearly not even ratified. First, there was independence. I'm talking about the Constitution, the anti-federal. I mean, it almost didn't happen. So this idea, it is a miracle. But you're right, and that sentiment, the slaveholding South, the regionalism, the nativism, all that stuff that was originally part of the, I guess you'd call it the small r Republican, the Democratic Republicans, the Jeffersonian ideal, which gave way to Jackson and beyond, really are forward. It really could trace a line, interestingly, to Donald Trump, even though they were the Democratic Party, which brings me to the historical point of the party you belong to, which I think is wonderful. How did you, because you're a young man, Michael, you're like 30, aren't you? So what I want to know is, which I'm very fascinated by, and I say this because I love it. Now, again, as a white guy, you know, I always won't speak for anybody's community. I hate when people speak for Jews or gay people. You know, I hate that stuff. White progressives drive me crazy when they don't speak for black people. Okay. However, I say this. No, I have a going over this. That is that I love that the Republican Party was the party of Lincoln. And I wish that both parties were attentive and I wish there was a healthy black constituency in the Republican Party, that the Democrats just didn't have this monopoly. Because, you know, let's face it, there's a lot of problems with doing that, you know. But you were a Republican, and how did you become one? What shaped you that? Because, you know.
I answer that question when I get it. So, you know, why are you Republican? And I tell them because my mama raised me well. And she raised me in a way to be an independent thinker, to recognize my civic responsibilities as well as the personal responsibilities that I owe to the community I live in. And she taught me these things growing, you know, as I was growing up in a city that was still segregated. People forget Washington, D.C. was still very segregated in the 60s. It was just coming out from a lot of that. There were places we couldn't go and things we were limited in doing. And there was still this very strong thread of racism that followed Black people around town, you know, when you go into certain stores or you're standing at a bus stop. So that was the environment. But she taught me to love this country nonetheless. And she instilled in me a certain set of values that aligned with how she wanted to see me as a young man and how she would raise me. And so when I got of age and started looking politically, my first presidential election was 1976. And on the ballot was a peanut farmer named Jimmy Carter and an embattled president who had assumed the presidency upon the resignation of Richard Nixon because of Watergate. So Gerald Ford is standing there trying to become trying to get a first full term as president. And watching all these various storylines, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, the front page of my newspaper were national events, world events. The Washington Star was my favorite newspaper back in the day. And, it told the story of the country in real detail and vivid color. And I would go, and it's funny, as a quick sidebar, speaking of, news, when I would go places, and this was true even when I was in the seminary up at Villanova, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the news with, my fellow seminarians. We're in the common room and we're kind of watching the news in the evening. And it would start off, President Reagan, because I went in 81, in the summer of 81. So Reagan was president. President Reagan today announced whatever. But first, there's a fire, and I'm like, wait a minute, time out. What did Reagan say? What do you mean?
Right.
The fire? We'll get to the fire. Tell me what
unique. The unique thing of living in the nation's capital, battling local news and national.
Right. The national news was my local news. I'm like, dude, come on. So you have a very unique perspective on these things. And the one thing my mother told me at that moment when I was trying to decide would I be a Democrat or Republican, and my mom and my dad were Roosevelt Democrats, and had been since forever. And my mother said, well, don't be a Democrat because I'm a Democrat or your dad's a Democrat. Right. Decide who you are, right? And have that be what you are, right? And so I did the history, I did the homework, and recognized that as a Black person, my political home was inside the Republican Party, because that's where we began. That's where our political voice emerged. The Frederick Douglasses of the world, Sojourner Truths they helped shape the Republican Party in the last few years of Lincoln's life. And for me, it was profoundly important to honor that legacy. And it was consistent with how my mama raised me. But the funny part was, Adam, when I went and told her that I finally decided to register as a Republican, she looked at me and go, why the hell would you go do that? So, you still got to deal with the reality. It's like, okay, I hope he does the right thing, but I'm not going to tell him what the right thing is. And she didn't. She let me figure it out, and I've been a Republican since 1976.
Yeah, I mean, and I love history like this. What's so interesting is that in the Ford-Dole ticket of 76, which I certainly would have supported. May Jimmy Carter bless him, and I know he's on his deathbed and whatever. He's just not wasn't not a good president in my opinion. And I really liked Gerald Ford. There's a wonderful biography I had the author on, Richard Norton Smith, called An Ordinary Man, kind of reappraising those weird, that interregnum of Ford. All of this is to say Gerald Ford in the House of Representatives, a young man in Grand Rapids, and Bob Dole, a young man in Russell, Kansas, were part of that huge Republican coalition to pass all the civil rights bills. And in 1976, they were the last on that ticket before the party really changed. Not altogether by any means Ronald Reagan's fault, but the party changed. And
Reagan made compromises that we're paying for today. And I mean, people forget that Ronald Reagan was despised by the Republican Party. He was not. And that was made very clear in that 76 battle when he ran for the presidency. The establishment of the GOP, which was largely a New England-based establishment, right? A gentrified base, and leadership resented the Republican governor from California. And California was very much a Republican state back in the day, but it was a progressive state. It was progressive Republicanism versus traditional Republicanism. So Reagan had views on certain issues that sort of tweaked the establishment view a little bit sideways. And so when he gets to the 76 campaign, and I would really encourage people to go back and listen to his speech at that convention when he concedes that defeat. You could see the clarion call in the direction and the vision of where he was going to go, that he was not stepping out, but he was actually leaning in, and he'd be back. And he was 4 years later. And in order to capture that nomination, he opened up the party to an emerging force, religious-based force known as the moral majority. And for the first time, his promise was, okay, we'll put a pro-life plank in our platform to support your issue. Because remember, the establishment Republicans at our core, and it's still at our core to this day, if you're true, is very libertarian. It's a very libertarian core. And we do not want government telling a woman or anybody else what it should do, what they should do with their health, with their bodies. Those are your choices. And a lot of the arguments around abortion in the 1970s, after the Roe decision, the late 70s, early 80s, centered around this sort of libertarian view that the states should decide. Leave it. The 10th Amendment is at play here. There is no federal mandate. There is no federal control here. Individual states shall decide, which the great irony is, after the Supreme Court says, okay, yes, the states should decide and abolishes Roe, those Republican-controlled legislatures are now arguing, they're doing their thing, right? The states are doing, but you're getting the call for a federal mandate of a national abortion ban. And so you can see how the party, even today, has moved so far away from its roots in terms of what it ideologically anchored it or moored itself to. And Reagan understood that to a certain extent and contributed to that unmooring of the party for political win. And it worked. So we have been dancing on the social issues ever since, injecting ourselves into the private lives of individuals where we have no business, nor do we belong. And another part of that irony was in 2010, we were making the case, Andrew, against Obamacare. Why? Because we didn't think the government had a role to play in the health decisions that a family would make about their health care. And here we are 13 years later, telling women, no, we get to decide when you're pregnant and force you to carry that child to term, regardless of the circumstances under which that child was conceived. So you begin to see how the party, under its press to be political winners, have undervalued the proposition of what the party originally stood for, and that was individual liberties.
Right, which is something that I think, not only forms the basis of what so many people believe, but I was saying this the other day, I guess whenever the day Nikki Haley came out with her capitulation, is that, to me, democracy, of course, first and foremost. But here I am, politically homeless. That's why this podcast was created. Very attracted to a limited government philosophy, of philosophy of personal liberty, but also philosophy of virtue. You spoke about your time in the seminary. Very interesting, because I do think that the institutional collapse of institutions in this country is really problematic in the name of social media, in favor of social media and, less civic associations. And quite frankly, though I'm not religious, less church going, less synagogue going, because your religion is not yourself. It's something else. It's your community. It's your civic group. It could be your God, your faith, your spirituality. And I think that sense of virtue in almost an Edmund Burkean way, who I love. We got to anchor, you know what I mean, freedoms in certain well-worn truths and virtuous ideas. It doesn't just exist floating through time, which used to be the critique of the left, right? It was sort of like unmoored from virtue, do whatever you want. What's more reckless, do what you want, do it as soon as you feel it, yell at everybody, act like an asshole than Trumpism? It's anchored in nothing.
It's anchored in nothing. And what I think has been interesting to watch, and I could, get into the historical kind of erosion that the party invited in for political purposes, because it recognized that except for that period of Reaganism, that making the case on a policy basis was more and more difficult, had become more and more difficult because of programs like the New Deal in the 1930s, which is when the Republican Party really began to sort of realize, oh crap, we got nothing, right? Because a lot of the stuff that we offered up collapsed in 1929. So it's hard now to make an economic recovery case based on Wall Street. Because people sit there going, well, I saw people jump out of buildings, so that can't be a good policy.
No, right? 22% unemployment, bank crashes, of course. And we not like now. Before I always remind people, before there was an FDIC, it even guaranteed $250,000 of your money. You had nothing.
Right. I mean, that's an excellent point. Go back to 2008. When we had the housing market crash, which bled into the financial markets. And if you didn't have that kind of insurance, how many, not just your home, insurance, but what about what you had in your bank account, right? So not
to be so elitist that everybody has $250,000. I just mean that's the limit that the government provides.
That's the limit. But the bottom line is, this country has always been about aspiration, and we aspire to wealth as we define it, right? And you can make a case against the billionaires and the zillionaires or whatever. I never begrudge anybody who had a better idea than me and was able to make some money off of it. God bless you.
I love it.
That's free enterprise. That's the market. Guess what? I'm going to use your product just like everybody else. And maybe in the course of time, I may come up with something that you're going to buy from me. That's the way the market works. But the other piece of this, and we saw this during the days of the robber barons, and we see it today through the robber billionaires. And that is how little value they add back. They add back to the overall expansion of economies. It's not just about, oh, well, I'm Amazon and I provide jobs. But it's the other things that you're able to do that makes you a community partner. And that's why I really admire what Bill and Melinda Gates have done in terms of taking their wealth and transferring it back into the public in a way in which other institutions are born up that are educating and providing good health and providing other programs in areas of the country to sort of create some level of a playing field. And so when that balance becomes out of balance, where the sense is I'm just taking, then you're going to have a natural reaction against that. And the party has always stood for this free market enterprise idea, but at the same time making the case for the working man and woman to create their own Main Street, right? To create their own mini Wall Street. And so that piece of it is vitally important, but it's also the rest of it, the social safety nets, the educational foundations that are misshapen and misaligned for certain communities. What's your response to that?
Well, I think, speaking to your former party, it's not your former party. There were two things that contributed to that.
Because it pisses them off.
I know. I love it. No, you know what? Good for you. I it makes me think of two things that are key in history to this. When you talk about the New Deal and how the Republicans reacted, they reacted poorly, obviously, to the Roosevelt, 4 terms. But Eisenhower, came in, I think a great president, and reconciled himself to the idea of a different kind of social safety net than America had known 20 years prior, to a sense of people knowing they wanted Social Security, pre-Medicare still, but just a semblance of, unions and things, while also kind of channeling a small government philosophy at his time. Again, he isn't terribly ideological. And then Nixon, who was his vice president, who was an NAACP liberal too, in many ways. Yeah. He was another one who changed. And now we actually know it in the history books, he, in an apparent deal with LBJ to continue Vietnam era policies, he was going to come in, and what did Nixon do? Now, whether or not it's based on LBJ or not, he created EPA, OSHA, EPA, yeah. He expanded affirmative action in hiring and contracting, and he reconciled himself to a post-Great Society world, all of which is to say the party didn't incinerate. It was, hey, we still have a view. We think the private marketplace and entrepreneurs need some relief. We can do this differently, but there's a certain floor we don't want people to fall out from under. All of this is to say, and I was talking about this as well the other day, weirdly enough, and I hate the kind of populism that emerged on the left originally for a variety of ideological reasons, the kind of even though, yes, I know there was a budget that threatened Social Security and stuff like that, so to speak, Trump really is a big government. He doesn't stand for anything, but he's not running on destroying the social safety net. He's more of a culture conf kind of guy, mad at immigrants and mad at the other, and kind of saying, I'm gonna make it right for you, and I'm gonna get revenge on my enemies. So he's, interestingly not, to the extent he believes in anything, looking to do. He's not Paul Ryan. He's not carrying Ayn Rand under his. He doesn't know how to read, probably. But he's carrying around Ayn Rand saying we need to shrink the state, and I'm going to be the subjectivist philosopher. He doesn't have that. So it's an interesting thing because his supporters, I think he would actually lose. Okay, besides the famous line, he wouldn't lose if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue. I think if he really came out and said, "Hey, F you all, no Medicare, no Social Security," which he's not going to do. I do think that could be, because these are third rails in American politics.
They still are. But I take your point.
He's not doing it, but it's
he's not doing that. He wouldn't do it because he doesn't care about it, and to the extent that he did care about it, the man's a Democrat. He always has been.
Yeah, right.
The man is a 1950s Democrat, 1960s Democrat. He's these MAGA fools running around acting like Donald Trump is, better than Reagan, better than Lincoln. I'm like, dude, he was a Democrat. What are you talking about? You criticize a Republican for sending $1,000 check to a Democrat running in a primary. He wrote a lot more to Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and Democrats across the country. So, stop it with that. But the reality of it is he would not go after those programs. And in fact, when given a chance to, he has backed away from going after those programs. Just as you're going to watch him backslide, and he's already started to do it on abortion. He still brags, yes, I got rid of Roe, but he is not an advocate for a lot of what you see happening at the states. Now, here's the rub. Here's the dirty little truth. The trade-off for him is if a Republican House and Senate send him a national abortion ban bill, he will sign it, right? Just because. So there is that truth about it. But as far as the issue itself, he's worse than agnostic on it. And,
I know.
And not enough people, well, put it this way, enough people turn a blind eye to it so they can use it politically. But the cynicism right now inside the GOP is breathtaking. The irony and the embrace of straight up lies is also equally breathtaking. But that's how they position themselves for the win. There is no governing policy infrastructure. Ask them, okay, when Russia rolls over Ukraine and decides to go into Poland, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do?
I mean, this is an interesting question.
Especially if you pull us out of NATO. What are you going to do?
Of course. Yeah, and by the way, Sweden and Finland joining NATO for the first time, doesn't that tell you anything? I mean, when Putin,
right.
They weren't even in NATO. I mean, but I bring this up because here we are, in our little ivory tower talking, and so I'm posing this question to you because I wrestle with it. What about people who say, I voted for Biden, I'm disappointed in him. I don't like Trump, but here's the thing. I don't have the luxury. Was what they, I'm just posing. I'm not saying I endorse this, but I wrestle with what they say to care about. I mean, I'm brass tacks. I got to worry about the cost of everything, what's happening, the gas prices. Democracy feels like a luxury. Worrying about Ukraine is not on my agenda. And when you poll people, you see that. So therefore, I'd rather take a risk on Trump just from an economic standpoint than continue where we're going, because I'm not voting on, the fate of the grand experiment. How do you handle that when people talk to you? Do you say too bad, or what do you mean?
No, I tell them that, okay, if you're not voting on the fate of the grand experiment, then you've given up on America. Because part of the bargain is the contract we have one to the other. Look, you think this is the worst of times? I remember being, a 16-year-old, getting my license, and gas was 50 cents a gallon.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love for gasoline to be 50 cents a gallon at the end, but it ain't going there. So why am I going to bitch about gas being $3 a gallon is not being 50 cents a gallon? Why are you bitching about gas not being $2 a gallon as it was 4 or 5 years ago?
And right? Trump isn't in control, neither is any president. Gas prices.
Control of that. So I said we had a war in Vietnam going on. We had cultural unrest here at home. We had civil rights. We had
oil embargo.
We had oil embargoes. We had 2 national leaders killed within 6 months of each other, right before our eyes on national television. And you're whining about the cost of eggs? And you're willing to turn the country over to a man who wants to be a dictator because you think he's going to make the price of eggs go down? Look around the globe, fool. What do you think people in Russia are paying for their food? Why do you think they're food lines? Tucker Carlson and his bullshit going around to a Moscow, supermarket and acting like, oh, look how clean and pretty it is.
Right.
Well, folks aren't in it because they can't afford to shop at that supermarket.
Course.
That's all backdrop. That's all theater. So I don't know what to tell you. I'm not going to cuddle you. I'm not going to coddle you.
No.
I'm not going to try to make you feel bad or better about anything.
No.
You need to ask yourself, when you go down this road, are you prepared to live with the consequences of the decision? Because I'm telling you, the worst thing to come out of Joe Biden is what? What? Tell me what it is. Tell me what the worst thing Joe Biden has done and can do in a second term. What do you think that is? Now, tell me what the worst thing Donald Trump can do on the first day. When people protest his inauguration and he invokes the Insurrection Act and starts indiscriminately rounding people up and locking them up. Then what? Because he doesn't like their speech? Oh, so now the First Amendment no longer matters. And when he decides which newspapers and which television programs we're to watch because the rest have been confiscated or nationalized, don't think that read what that Project 2025 plan is. Yes, it's 900 pages. Sit your lazy ass down and read it, because you need to understand what tomorrow looks like if you go down that road. So I'm beyond the sort of, oh, let me help you understand. I feel I'm having the pity party. No, bitch, I ain't doing a pity party with you. This is too important. I don't want my sons growing up in Trump's America, period. And if we're not prepared to draw that bright line like our founders did with England, and our founders did amongst themselves for those who got weak-kneed and started pussyfooting around about backsliding and, well, we could probably do a king, or,
Yeah.
I don't think the states should have too much power, all of that. If we're not prepared to draw those bright lines, then be prepared for what comes next.
Yeah.
Because a man who stands up and tells us that he likes Viktor Orban, read what Viktor Orban has done to Hungary. People.
Well, one of the things that often follows when people complain about things, right? They say, well, I don't care about everything we just said, prices and the luxury to care about democracy. But then they say, yeah, but Biden's weak on the world stage, and we got to deal with that. So now they do care about the world stage. 5 minutes before, they said they didn't care.
Where is he weak on the world stage?
Well, they have. Well, how do we say this? Into the bloodstream has been injected a really powerful narrative, because it brings me to my next point. Because I think it is incredibly, Michael, and I'm just not a Pollyanna or naive about politics. Politics is irrational. It's one in the heart. It's not logical, as you know. I'll tell you this. It's not some kind of rational, well, Joe Biden's infrastructure, though I think that was a good thing. The narrative has worked because these swing state polls, I don't care about swing state polls, they are dangerously close. Now, we don't know how they'll play out, but there is something amiss. I argue that Trump compounded the institutional mistrust that's in America of everything, meaning the reason people don't value the American ideal is they don't trust anything anymore. And he capitalized on that in the most mendacious and horrible way. Because how else can you explain it? This is his third election. Really? I mean, I know you and I are on the same page, but you're going to go back with this guy? We're going to do this again?
Yeah.
And you think that King Trump, by the way, which is what he wants to be, he's just your inflation's going. That's it. Inflation's going down, interest rates, and King Trump, boom, magic wand, right?
I mean,
gas
how
prices.
does inflation go down when you put 100% tariff on everything? Don't you know what a tariff is? It's
no,
not
they
a
don't.
Tax. It's not a tax on a European country. It's a tax on the American people, because all they're going to say, oh, you're going to put 100% tariff on our cars? Fine. Guess what? The price of buying this car to a U.S. citizen has now gone up because we're not paying the tariff. You are, dummy.
Yeah. Yep. Of course, it's a tax on every every consumer. But he sold it as it's national security. We're losing to China.
No, there's no policy in the world in which national security, unless you are in a world war crisis, which we are not, is where you're going to sit there and put a tax on your allies. And even then, you wouldn't put the tax on your allies. You're fighting the same fight, for heaven's sake. Why would I? Our enemy is Russia.
Yep.
China is our competitor.
Right.
Right. So understand what the global landscape looks like, MAGA, before you open your mouth. Read a book. Oh, I'm sorry, you're burning books. I forgot. I'm sorry.
Michael, what about
books you have to read because you don't like the history, or you don't like the storylines that expose just how out of reality you are. But look, we can either coddle this crap, or we can be a resistance to it. I mean, I'm sorry, if I get an infection, what do? Do I let it consume my body?
No.
Or do I go
treat it right away? Doctor. Yeah.
And the doctor in this case is our Constitution, the rule of law, the various institutions that have been designed and built to uphold those very articles and roles. And the other part of it is our leadership. Stop electing bad leaders. Stop electing the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Matt Gaetz and the Byron Donalds. Stop it.
Liz Cheney, remember when Liz Cheney, I think it was the Austin event or one of those institutes, and she said, we are electing idiots.
We're electing idiots. We really are. And let me tell you what that is. As someone who knows campaigns a little bit and knows how voters, all that, are the people we elect are an extension of us.
Yep.
They are an extension of us in the best of times, in the worst of times.
Yep.
And so the reality of it is, if you want to do better and be better, you need to elect better leaders. If you want to wallow in self-pity and remorse and grievance and anger, yeah, then Donald Trump is your guy. You're not going to feel better about your circumstance or your situation because he's not going to do anything to improve it. The man couldn't get an infrastructure bill done to help fill a damn pothole when he had control of the House and the Senate. Oh, and then you want to bitch about the border? Well, we had a very conservative border bill. And Donald Trump told Republicans not to pass it. Why? Because he wanted to run on it in November. Oh, remember that thing called Obamacare? What were Republicans going to do? During Trump, we're going to repeal and replace. They couldn't even come up with their own bill. So people, I mean, this is, I don't have to go back to 1872 to get you to understand what happened in 2019 or 2018. Yep. Stop it.
Yeah, I know it's frustrating. I mean, I wanted to make sure we touch on your essay today or your article in MSNBC for MSNBC. I help the Republican Party win elections. You right now, it's forgetting how to do that. The party's embrace of election denial is going to make it harder to win in the future by making it impossible to learn when it loses. And then you write, the Republican National Committee has lost sight of this goal, and every day it takes another step farther away from it. Following in the well-worn path of Republican elected officials, the party's leaders are twisting themselves in knots to appease Donald Trump's lies about the legitimacy of our electoral process. This week, Christina Bobb and 10 other Trump allies pleaded not guilty in Arizona's fake electors case. Bobb just happens to serve as the RNC's senior counsel for election integrity. Someone accused of election crimes is now solely focused on litigating election and related concerns for the Republican Party. You can't make this up. Or if you were speaking, you'd say you can't make this shit up.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that, and to me, what I love about this, and it's such good timing because not that we needed this essay to have you to double down on your views, but this is the rub about everything we've talked about during this time together and every day. Guys, if you have elections, right? Let's be basic. And if you and I run against each other, Michael, and you win, okay? And I refuse to accept that I lose, guess what? We don't have a democracy, folks. It's over. End of story. Just to make it simple to people. That's what I do with, when you get these, you guys they're going off on this. I said, so the Donald Trump, and I had a conservative shock jock on last week. We got into it. I have everybody on. I'm always willing to. I said, Donald Trump has not conceded the 2020 election. He couldn't fight me on that, but he said, but all the irregularities. I said, what irregularities? Where? Safest election. Oh, there's all this. I said, listen. I wouldn't go there. I said, we're not doing 60 lawsuits later. Everything's been proven. Release the Kraken, Sidney Powell. You guys, you lost the election. You know what? If you weren't focused on undermining the Constitution every turn and trading in idiocy, mendacity, racism, and BS, you might win an actual election on your own terms, but you're losing them.
And that's an absolute correct point. And the remaining truth of this is you got to run the race. You got to know the rules, and you got to play by those rules. And because you didn't like the outcome, you don't get to change the rules, which is what we're seeing happen in a bunch of Republican states where, I tell Republicans, who are listening to Donald Trump in 2020 about, vote by mail. I was like, yo, dumbasses, how do you think we won all those elections in 2010? I organized vote by mail per the laws of the various states. Whatever they said I could do, I did. How do you think I get seniors who are the rock bottom of our vote? How do you think you get a 70-year-old voter who's, unable to leave their house to vote? They got to vote by mail. They're not rolling up to a polling place. But you're telling everybody vote by mail is corrupt. All right, guess what's going to happen? You're going to lose. So you're going to rely on the same day vote. And that's fine. But you're not going to turn out everybody you need to turn out on the same day, because that 70-year-old grandma is not being wheeled out of her retirement home. And so it's just.
And by the way, not to help their bidding, your rural base that can't get 30 miles away from a polling station and they've got diabetes and they're working on a scooter and they want to vote for Trump, they could mail it in. They could mail their ballot in to Pennsylvania. But no, they're in the middle of the Poconos and can't get there. But nope, you're not doing it because you think it's a Democratic scam, or whatever.
Well, just continue to do that. If that's what you want to do, continue to do that. Please, this November, don't vote by mail, right? Because Donald Trump tells you not to. Oh, wait a minute. He just came out and said, y'all need to vote by mail. I wonder why he did that. Oh, now vote by mail is okay? Oh, now early voting is all right? What? Y'all, stop being stupid. Stop it. Stop this whipsawing back and forth where 1 minute you're like, oh, that's corrupt. We can't do that. The next minute you're making excuses why it isn't. Because now you say, oh, well, we're not losing. We're losing elections. We got to win. And I guess we need to stop cutting ourselves off at the ballot box, because that's what you're doing. Oh, and by the way, if the RNC was serious, you would not have put Laura Trump in as the co-chair of the party.
Right.
Because I don't even know who the chairman is. Michael Watley, I haven't seen him since he got elected. He's not the face, nor the voice, nor the leader of this party. I'm sorry, I was a chairman. I know what a chairman's supposed to do. You carry the weight. You answer the call. You're responsible. You can have someone who can be out there and do the promo stuff for you. But Laura's not a politician. Laura is a singer, and not a real good one. Thank God for auto-tune, right?
Right.
Stop it. This is who's running our campaigns. You fire everybody, Adam, 6 months before an election because you don't trust them to be pure 100% all about Donald Trump. Oh, so you're not interested in down ballot races. You're not interested in political directors who know the states of Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. So you want to fire them and put in people who are solely focused on electing one person. So if Donald Trump wins and he doesn't have a Senate and a House, how do you think that's going to go? Because you're not winning the House. The House is already gone.
No, I know. It's pretty much gone now, but for one vote, really.
Gone, right? You whittled it down to one because you let Margaret Stupid Green be the speaker de facto of the House now for two speakers. So set that aside. The Senate is even in play. Oh, don't believe me? Trust me. I looked at the numbers and I see what's going on, and I'm talking to the voters. It ain't as easy as you think it's going to be. Just because you have a greater number of opportunities to win doesn't mean you're going to win those races, because statewide races at the federal level are very different than statewide races at the state level, running for governor or
despite everybody worrying or hand-wringing about what did not turn out to be a red wave. Those were close elections, though. Thankfully, Fetterman, beat Oz, and thankfully, Herschel Walker didn't get elected. But imagine, right, and Mastriano in Pennsylvania, imagine if a Michael Steele era GOP or a normal person would have run. McConnell wanted moderates. Those were winnable seats. So I agree with you. I mean, again, you're running Mem, running Carrie Lake again. How'd that go for you last time?
Right. And trust me, I've talked to enough Republicans in Washington. They don't want Carrie Lake in the Senate. They don't want Marjorie Taylor Greene in the House. But they can't. What do you do when the infrastructure is now been consumed by MAGA? And that infrastructure starts at what's going on in state operations, from the national committee man and woman to the chairman, and all the political at the central committee level, all those folks. You're watching MAGA consistently take over more and more of those seats. So the idea of actually creating competitive races, and by competitive races, what I mean is you don't take out a Republican who can win in a Democratic space, just as you don't take out a Democrat who can win in a Republican space, right? Because they're the only ones who can win. For whatever reasons, however it comes together, those voters like that particular candidate. So guess what? That's one for us. Let's keep that seat. Oh, but no, now you want a primary then because you want MAGA, and you win the primary, and then you get your ass handed to you in a general election. I give you Maryland, and on the heels of a 2-term popular Republican governor, we nominate some MAGA numbnut for governor, and he gets blown out by almost 60 points. What do you think happens? How do you think that plays out? Of course, that's your narrative. So when I talk about in this piece for MSNBC Daily, is this idea that this party has to reconcile itself with voters,
Mm-hmm.
and it has to strip itself bare of all the bullshit and come honest and come clean about what you stand for and what you value, and elevate those. So if you're going to be full-blown MAGA, then fine. That's what you're doing, but be prepared to live with the consequences of that. Don't think you can show up in the Bronx and have a whole lot of white folks imported in from elsewhere because the Bronx is black and brown, right? And then you get on the stage with two individuals who are under 140 criminal indictments for murder and fraud, conspiracy, and other crimes. And that's what you're selling to the black community?
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, if people don't realize, I don't care what, excuse me, what color you are, that Trump needs the drug, the endorphin rush of a rally, especially in the same city where he's been sitting in a courtroom down there and he's all gloomy and depressed. He needs to go to the Bronx and pretend.
Anyway, he now lives in Florida.
I know.
So don't even pretend like New York is your home. You got out of town, bitch. Leave it alone.
Right. And you go to a place like the Bronx. New York is, of course, not in play. They keep saying it is. Not only that, you're going to a place that is just completely out of reach for you. But doesn't matter. You're P.T. Barnum. You're there for the show.
You're creating the visual backdrop, and you're adding this as another layer in the permission structure that you want to put out there for people to believe that somehow you're going to win New York. There are 8.3 million voters in New York, 3,000 people, many of whom were not from the community where you were holding your rally, showed up. You tell me under what circumstances you win New York, because it's not happening. But that's not the point, because that feeds the broader narrative that he's running this race and that everybody wants him back. We're desperate for Donald Trump. Oh my God, I can't pee straight without Donald Trump, right?
Right.
And that's the lie he's selling people. And the reality of it is, on the other side of that is a dystopian America in which one man sits in the White House controlling the judiciary, the Congress, the military, and everything you do every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, is not freedom.
No. Michael, before we leave, though, and so we don't get completely glum and,
sure.
You want
a happy note?
Well, I it's, I wish I did.
You want a happy note? I got a cookie.
I had a root canal yesterday, so I can't eat a cookie, but I'm eating it. I'm vicariously eating it through you. Here we are at this point. This is more of I don't know if it's a hopeful note, is just a question. You're there. You're a Republican. There's a Liz Cheney. Okay. Who else? I don't know who else is there, but there's many of us looking for a home. We haven't had a new party in this country since your party was created to support the expansion of slave states or slave territories in 1854. Is there a possibility for another party? I mean, the reason I ask that is the reason I say that is, apart from Nikki Haley being the invertebrate that she is, yet she's one more person depriving enough people, and I consider myself one of those people, of a center-right, a healthy, conservative center-right alternative to the Democrats. No, we don't do that now. Now we're just going to be the fascist party or the autocratic party, or use your adjective. But so it feels, obviously, I'm on Team Blue until further notice, but I'm uncomfortable there. Right. What do you think? I mean, I know you've already been in office. I'd love to see you back in. You'd be great. I mean,
I'd love to get back into public service again, because I believe there are a lot of great things that we can still do. I'm very excited about the next generation, the Maxwell Frosts of that generation who are stepping into his leadership. Yes, he's a young Democrat, but there are a lot of young Republicans and independents out there who also, I think, would do well in public service because they look around and they see the illiberalism, they see the stripping bare of our rights and privileges under the Constitution, and they want to do something about that. So that part of it gives me hope. How that takes shape and what form that comes, that's going to be the test in the short term. I've long argued for, in this constitutional democracy, a broader set of voices to emerge politically, meaning we should have 3, 4, 5 political parties. And I don't think you're looking at, a party that's only 10%. I mean, I'm talking healthy representation where each party is garnering, 20%, 25% of the vote in any election. You have to actually go out with ideas and fight your way through the political gauntlet of making the case for why your values, your ideas, your policies are going to be best for the future. That to me is healthy. I'm hoping we get there sooner rather than later. I think after this election, if Donald Trump wins, there is going to be, I think either way, I'll correct myself on this, Adam. I think either way, a win by Trump or a win by Biden, within the Republican Party, there is a fight coming. It is long overdue. And baby, I am ready for it.
I can't wait. And don't forget this too. Trump is, not to minimize anything, he is a buffoon and an old buffoon. I mean, one thing that has been noted, I'm not minimizing anything. I mean, Hitler and Stalin were true believers. They were young guys. This guy he's a threat, but he is old. He could die. I'm just being real, meaning that there is a world where, I don't know what it looks like. There is a post-Trump world. It might be apocalyptic, but it's there. It will be there at some point.
It's a post-Trump world that will be carried on by the remnants of Bannon and Gates and others. Then you look in the Senate, you've got the Josh Hawleys and the Ted Cruzes. Do they pivot back to normal, or do they stay? They see the political upside for them, that they can be the inheritors of Reagan. That was part of the battle. And just so I could probably give this part of our conversation some real important context. When Reagan left the White House in January of 1989, and the vice president, now President George H.W. Bush, took leadership, there began inside the party a real question of who would be the next Ronald Reagan. And that was never resolved because Bush was there. He had more of a patrician style, old Republican style. Reagan had evinced a different conservative model, right? And it had a lot of appeal to it. Had an appeal for a young African-American kid at 17 growing up in DC. And so it had a real appeal to it. But when he left the White House, there was no Reagan to step into his shoes. There was no one who could carry that mantle successfully. Bush held the office for 1 term. Bill Clinton comes in for 2. During the course of all of that, a lot of Republicans checked out. George Bush, 43, comes on. There are no connections. So the interest began to wane. There was no real fight that emerged so that a leader would then step forward and reclaim that mantle and prosecute Reaganism into the 21st century. That's what's going to happen here. You do have people who are aligned and are aligning themselves to carry on that fight. But they're going to have to go through folks like myself, whether we, if we decide to stay in the party, and that structure is something that we could take back and then rebuild from. Otherwise, to the essence of your question, we will chart a different course. And and they will be left out in a no man's land of not winning elections, because the fractionalization will be such that there will be a new home for Adam Epstein and Michael Steele.
Yep. One hopes so. Reminds me of the old line, and I think you're there as a stopgap, Michael. You know, it's better to be inside the tent pissing out, right, than outside the tent pissing in. You're right, and you're in the tent. I'd rather you. I love that you're still there.
Hey, look, Adam, I'm in the tent and everybody getting wet.
You guys are, but you know what? I love that you've stayed there as someone who is not in a party. I think I told you last time, you know, it's been 5 years since I've been a Democrat. I mean, again, I don't think they're a threat to democracy, but I think they got so much wrong. They get so much wrong, and that's okay. As American, we don't have to agree. American, that's not the same thing as fighting fascists, you know. It's not
right, exactly.
But here we are, Michael Steele. This is our part 2 of our conversation. We can go on and on and on, as you know. And
appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, I have to do that as part of our series. Where can everybody find you? Although you're so famous on the socials, where can people?
So I'm on the weekend, every weekend, Saturday, Sunday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. I'm there with Alicia Menendez and Simone Sanders Townsend doing the weekend. And you can follow me on Twitter at Michael Steele. Instagram, chairman_Steele. So yeah, I'm all over trying to make a good noise for our country, because now more than ever we need individuals who still believe in and love this country to say, we're done, not on my watch.
Amen. Amen. Well, let's never let the cause die. That's all.
You got it, my friend.
All right. Well, Michael Steele, thank you. And thank you guys for listening. Stay dirty, stay moderate, stay safe.
Good stuff.
Michael, good stuff. We got a good one. I love it. Got so many good clips, you know.
Excellent.
You know, after a while, it's like you can perfect. We all can do this. We can perfect our act, but I don't mean that to either of us disparagingly, because there's no act, because we're in such grave danger. But, you know, the idea that we can get our talking, you know, we have to be so clear about what we're doing here.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh.
And, you know, this is sadly not a musical. Because in a musical, the world's problems are resolved in song and dance. That's the whole point of it.
There you go.
Right?
There's the big number, and you know everybody's doing their thing.
Exactly.
So, exactly. It's great to be on with you, my friend.
By the way, I didn't bring it up. I just forgot we had so much other things to talk about. When we spoke on your show, you thought it might be Stefanik. Do you think Haley will be the running mate?
Well, you know,
could be, right?
It could be at this point, because maybe she cut the side deal, but I wouldn't trust Donald Trump in any deal. I mean, he's reaped the benefit. So, you know, it doesn't matter what he promised her. What's she going to say after